Recording in progress. Okay. So there's a couple of new people here, I think. Cameron, I don't think you've been here before, and Mark, I'm not sure if you have. So the conceit here is that in this regards, comments you're likely to make along the way. It's 1882. The book has just been published. A friend has recommended the book. You know a little bit about Nietzsche, but not a lot. And you're exploring what he has to say at that time. So anything that occurs after this time in terms of criticism or influence is effectively unknown. We're dealing with Nietzsche in the beginning. So that's kind of how we've been doing this. So we're doing aphorism 18 to 22 today. And well, we'll just see how far we get. Maybe we'll get through all, maybe we won't. So the first one is number 18, the pride of classical antiquity. And I think this is a really interesting observation. And I think what Nietzsche's trying to do here is, I think a lot of what these early aphorisms are doing are showing that not everything in a Socratic manner, not everything that we think we know, and that a lot of things are just culturally oriented. And I think what he's suggesting here is that it's not possible to experience the same kind of cultural space today that the classical Greeks did. And I think that may be extended to almost any civilization, but he doesn't go quite that far. He's specifically speaking about classical antiquity, that when we use the word slave, it doesn't mean anything like it meant in 400 BC Athens. And we cannot have that same experience. Any thoughts on that? That's what I think he's saying.
I'm kind of of the opinion that he also, as a major theme, he likes to call attention to the fact that we don't know the outcome of certain social tendencies that we're having. I think that's in number today in number 19. Yeah, just about anything. Number 20, there's an evolution of morals or an evolution of values, the genealogy of morals, so to speak, if he hasn't written the book yet. But yeah, that there's going to be an evolution to all of these social tendencies, such as selfishness,
well, whatever.
prudence, yeah, all that. Everything we're going to talk about today, I think, reminds me of that too. But definitely, this first one, number 18, refers back to the habit of ancient Greece.
Yeah. Well, it's specifically dealing with the notion that we cannot understand the concept of slavery when we use the word that the Greeks understood, that the classical, if a classical Greek used the word slave, it meant something alien to us today, in the sense that we're actually experiencing the word or the presence of that kind of slavery. Wow.
For sure that we can have a certain notion of what is slavery, but none of us is a Greek living 25 centuries ago. And of course that the social framework, the mentality, the difference or the distance, the abysmal difference between a Greek aristocrat and a slave that was his property, that he is allowed to kill without reason, is something that we can imagine as a concept, but that we don't have the sensibility. I think that that is the key word. I read the first sentence. The specific hue which nobility had in the ancient world is absent in ours because the ancient slave is absent from our sensibility. So we can have a concept of a slave, and slavery is not so far away from us if we think that slavery has been abolished in the state in 1865, and there are still some form of slaveries in many countries in the world. But I would say that but slavery as a natural, spontaneous, living sensibility. I think that our age has been so permeated with the idea of equality between
Mhm.
human beings that I agree that we don't have that kind of sensibility, that even Plato would not be capable to see a slave, in the sense that it was the slave was an object of property for him. He cannot look at him at the same manner than he looked at his brother Glaucon or as his friend uh, uh, Perdiccas, for example. I stop here.
Okay, do you have a reluctance to download the free modern translation? You're using the, I think, the common translation, and yours doesn't read like mine at all. And that word sensibility does not appear in the modern translations. So do you have a reason why? Because I know I've asked you before to do that. Could you
Oh,
download the,
uh,
there's
for
a,
the very simple reason that it's a free copy. That's all. Is the other copy is a free copy too? It's a very down to earth reason.
it's, I know, but it's wrong in a lot of ways. And that's why the modern translations have cleared it up. And so the modern translations are the one that the rest of us are using. And so
Yeah,
when you read the quotes, you're reading something that's different than what most of the rest of us are all seeing.
yeah,
So
but
it's free. You have to join academia, but all you'll get is a bunch of emails
yeah,
about, and it's, and you can download it to your books, and it's Cambridge University, I think
yeah.
2008, and I really appreciate it if you would do that.
But
James, evolution, and to coin a word here, it's not really an evolution exactly. It's more of a revaluation, to coin a phrase. Barbara.
Well, what strikes me about this now, I'm not sure what translation I have, but it says that not only that we can't appreciate what it is to have slaves or to have slaves embedded in the society, but it's saying that, at least in my translation, a creature who is not at its own disposal and who lacks leisure is by no means something despicable to us. So he is saying that in a way, not only have we adopted the norm as a kind of slavery, but then he goes on to say, perhaps each of us possesses too much slavishness. So he's kind of making that a correlation between social equality and slavishness, or being a slave. And that's interesting. Because he seems to be saying that back in the day when you had a hierarchy, well, I'm not really sure what he's saying about that, but he's saying you had a hierarchy. And here he's saying that without that hierarchy, where it's flattened out and people are equal, in a way that must take away people's agency or freedom. I mean, that's one thing that's implied there.
Yeah, yeah. There's a footnote in the Kaufman translation that says, in this sense, slavish is the antonym of liberated or autonomous. So you're right. You're headed in the right direction with that. Okay, Nicole.
I was thinking something really funny because he said, even the most powerful men on earth belonged among their slaves. I think that sentence kind of reminds me of how the slaves serve as the foundation for those people to be creative and to, create thoughts to be a philosopher. Without the slaves, they would need to have extra time to cook, to buy groceries, to do laundries, and those things are going to take a lot of time out of your day. Then you're going to lose those time when you can actually create, you can write, you can think. I think that's actually a very practical problem. Because think about, the Yeats, the poet. He used to live with this lady, Gregory. She used to make him milk every day, like 2 p.m., to make sure he can get his milk. I find it funny. I was like, the thing is, I struggle with the laundry, grocery shopping. Because I was thinking about everything every day, what I need to eat and stuff. And then I had to do those things and I don't have time to read. So I think having a secretary or having like a butler or nanny, maybe that would actually lay the foundation for the nobility to write and to be a noble. That's my take on it. I found this funny. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me think of what I was going to say.
Because really, doing laundry, cooking, cleaning, it's not easy.
That's what it was. The slaves, and I want to correct one on that one. The Greek and Roman slavery was nothing like American slavery. They could not kill them for no reason at all. They had a place in society, and the places are the places you were just referring to. And so I've got this thought in my head that Marx, I don't know if he invented the phrase, but workers in factories were wage slaves because they were doing the kind of manufacturing work. And I think even artisans were possibly considered slaves in ancient Greece. Juan.
Yeah, I think that this paragraph introduced a very interesting distinction, and I think that Nicole stressed one of the distinction in the sense that the slave is someone that cannot have free time. Okay, and in ancient times, the notion of free time is very important uh, because a free man is precisely fundamentally characterized by the fact that he can have osium, O-T-I-O-M, meaning free time for studying philosophy, literature, history, and that kind of stuff. And the absence of free time is negotium, okay, commerce. So that aristocratic distinction that was very down to earth is absolutely interesting because I would say that is, as Nikon said, the foundation of an aristocrat, okay? That you can have free time to do the noblest things, studying philosophy, discussing philosophy, studying history, and so on. The other thing that this paragraph is introducing too is that the Greek philosopher would look down on most people as slaves, even powerful men, precisely, because they, for the Greek philosopher, of course, we can debate if it's right to think so. Those men who did not develop their mind by philosophy or by other stuff are the slave of their passions. They might be a king, they might be wealthy, etc., but they are still the slave of their passion. So I would say that it introduced slavery at the lower level of practicality, of wealth, and of the capacity to have free time, and slavery at a more fundamental level, meaning are you still prisoners of your passion, though did you develop justice, valor, humanity, and wisdom? I stop here.
Okay. James.
Yeah, I thought that the most powerful line for me was the idea that it's that virtually everyone was a slave. That's not true. The way Aristotle talked about it, there were householders and slaves, but he says here everyone who was a non-philosopher was a slave in my translation, and then in this I'm sorry, in the Kaufman, and then everybody was very proud, that was not a slave, was very proud, thinking that their class of slaves contained the most powerful people, contained very powerful people. So this was kind of like a pride of having a wide variety, lots of, and powerful slaves. And I guess that to me is the most startling thing. And then the the idea of the fact that we are slavish today. We inherited some of the habits of the slave class. So I think that's pretty interesting, but he doesn't develop it. He just sort of like lays it out there.
Okay, are we all in agreement? This was the thesis that I laid out in the beginning. I think he's trying to show that some conventions are completely cultural, and if you're not in that culture, you will not be able to experience the concept of slave the same way at all. In fact, he uses the word alien. And this pride too was alien and impossible. And what you were talking about, James, was the way the philosopher looked at powerful men. Because what Guan said, they're the slaves of their passions. They're not actual slaves. There weren't any powerful slaves. Okay. So we're all in agreement. All righty. Moving on to 19. There's a phrase, and I don't know if it's in his notes, or I think it's probably down the road. That's a more direct statement of the last sentence of this little thing on the nature of evil. And I think what he's trying to say here is what he said earlier in one of the earlier aphorisms, that things that we think of as evil can actually be beneficial to cultures, to societies, and even to people. And so the last sentence, the poison of which weaker natures perish strengthens the strong, and they do not call it poison. I think it's really an interesting line. But I think that's basically what's going on here. He's just trying to show once again that things that are considered evil are actually beneficial in some peculiar way to certain people. Beautiful, James.
Yeah, I think a simple way to say it is that adversity can be good for you, and what is poison for the weak can be tonic for the strong.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and leap ahead, and I think you're all familiar with what Nietzsche said. I probably down the road. There's a footnote to this. That which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. I think we all know that one. Okay, go on.
Well, you said what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so again, he's playing with these notions, right? Sometimes there are a lot of different ways to look at the same things and see them differently. Some ways are conventional, but they're not necessarily the right ways, and they might even change as time goes by. Okay, so 20 is we may not. Okay, we'll see where we go with it. The dignity of folly. I think this is just a playful piece. I don't think he's trying to be serious, because at the end he says, to be noble might then come to mean to entertain follies. Because remember, he established nobility earlier in the earlier aphorisms as someone who is against their time. They are untimely. And so I think this is just a little bit of a play. And I was trying to think of something here that I could give as an example of something currently, but I just couldn't quite come up with anything. Nicole.
The last sentence is intriguing. He said, to be noble might then come to mean to entertain follies. Do you really need to entertain follies? For example, let's say if you have a book club where you're gonna actually post reviews about books on the internet, but to stoop over to stoop to maybe the mass, the book taste, you're gonna talk about like, those like disposable fictions, I don't know those disposable fictions, but the popular ones, but maybe not worthwhile while reading. Then you stoop to their level, and that's like entertaining people who you are not supposed to entertain. Is that really being noble? I guess like
I don't think you're expressing the thought necessarily. Being noble something is a word he's tossed around a lot without ever really defining it. I think he's working on a kind of definition. And the only thing I settled on was what I said earlier, the idea that there's a nobility in going against the grain. And not
yeah,
here.
nobility going against the grain. Yeah, I agree with you. I think, but at the same time, the thing is, if the knowledge you're learning, you keep them in the ivory tower, you don't really try to make them accessible, readable to the mass. What is the for, right? So maybe he's right. I'm just like trying to like understand what he's saying here. Maybe noble is like you have to make yourself accessible to the follies, which means maybe the mass.
Well, I think what he's trying to do here is just show that if you were in a society where prudence was the primary virtue, that nobility would be reflected by entertaining follies instead of prudence, of being prudent. I think he's just sort of tossing this out there to go, would that be noble in that in that social milieu?
I thought about another example. You think about the academias. The academias, in the universities, obviously they're accessible to students. But when as adults, like later on, you wanted to get that kind of knowledge, we don't have access to it unless we pay a large portion of tuition. I think that sort of thing, you're being noble, being in the academic world, but you're not sharing your information.
Well, okay.
I think education should be made more accessible to people, right? Because not everybody has the means to actually pay so much money to get a degree.
I don't think that's the point he's trying to make here, though.
Okay.
I think this is a lot simpler.
That's my,
nobility is a kind of, and I don't even know what I mean sometimes when I say that. And when I say like going against the grain, that's not the only thing that would define a noble person. There's going to be more, because that couldn't be it. Then,
so what is exactly a noble person then?
What?
What is a noble person? How to be noble in your everyday life?
I think Nietzsche is working on that. And he's just suggesting that this might be part of what nobility would be. Now, nobility has nothing to do with aristocracy and wealth and any of that stuff. So, James.
Well, to be noble means to be esteemed by society, like an important psychologist or scientist.
That to you, not to Nietzsche. Not to Nietzsche. That is not what Nietzsche means.
No. All right.
No.
Anyway, well, I'm more on the side of like what you were saying before, Lindsay. If how does this apply to the current, the current times? And there's two ideas here. I guess one is the idea of prudence becoming mandatory. Like a social tendency towards prudence becoming mandatory, and it would become less honored. It would lose its dignity, and people would be disgusted, and it would be vulgar. And the thing he compares it to, I think, is relevant to the current time. The truth and science. If truth and science reigned over society, lies would gain in esteem. So you have this war now, war against disinformation. So if somebody says something that somebody doesn't agree with, and there's an established truth, then you go to war against that lie or whatever. So the idea is that the 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 importance of people contradicting truth has kind of like maybe it's become more important in the 21st century, than it was back, 150 years ago, say. So so it's a little bit about reversal of customs. He thinks that these things could go backwards. You could have lies becoming more important, and you could have the prudence could become more of a folly or a vulgarity. Could and people would be kind of embarrassed for right. It's a play too, but I do like that one idea though, that if lies would be more esteemed if truth and science reigned over society. And if there's anything about today that's different from 150 years ago, it's yes, science is a lot more important now.
Yeah, excuse me, I don't know if this is a good example or not, but I was thinking that we've got a history of being a capitalist country, and so you have to pursue wealth. You have to go get a job. You have to do all of this other stuff. And to be noble might be to be intentionally homeless, or go living out in the woods somewhere on your own with your own power and all that sort of stuff. That would be the opposite of pursuing the virtue that our society ennobles in its own way. Quan.
Okay, so I think that precisely, I think that Nietzsche seems to stress that the society would dictate a certain rules for conformity, and you just gave the example of a capitalist society, could be anything else. And for Nietzsche, what I understand that he seems to consider nobility as a kind of conscious opposition. And during his time, there was a kind of people that were called the dandies. Okay, the dandies most of the time were people of the upper class, and they adore behaving or dressing themselves in a manner to provoke the conformity of the society. That's a small example. But I think that in Nietzsche idea of nobility, there is a lot that idea of opposing what the society defines as conformity. I know it's not in the paragraph but I want to add that going against what is defined as conformity can be interesting, but here I think that there's a fine distinction between being revolutionary or noble or being rebellious, meaning acting more like a teenager. I stop here.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Barbara.
Well, just to follow on to that, or maybe think of it a different way, the word tyranny is what jumps out at me. And of course, whenever we think of tyranny, that expression, we always think tyranny of the majority, and we know what that means, right? So it is a kind of conformity. But it's also, he's saying that because prudence is so highly valued, it kind of becomes commonplace and loses its special character. And it also becomes dogmatic because it's tyrannical. So you have this double-edged sword where you can't really have a noble virtue that's commonplace and dogmatic. So he's just sort of flipping maybe he's trying to make a joke and he says we should entertain folly instead, or we should entertain foolishness, because at least that way nobody will copy us, or it won't just become commonplace and dogmatic, at least not at first.
Yeah, I think you've really, in my perception and analysis here, I think you really nailed it. I think that's exactly right. Nicole.
Sorry. So James just mentioned about like the education and the knowledge. I think that is in line with what Nietzsche said about the science could increase esteem for the life. But I I don't agree with this because I feel like knowledge and education is not going to make a person noble, because people with knowledge and education can be prickly, can be a prick entirely. I think being noble, from my understanding, is you have to actually know how to treat people well. You gain respect, you being esteemed is not what you have, it's about how you treat people. And also, I like the dandy example, but I don't think a dandy is like the example for being noble, but it's kind of like what you said about like small portion of the group of people who trying to manifest their uniqueness in a different way using clothing, right? But doesn't mean they have anything inside or anything substantial.
Yeah. Okay. What I'd like to do again is this quote again, the thing I've got, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. Basically, it's I think Nietzsche is inviting you to attack your convictions. That's part of what he's doing here. So what you think is noble, I think he would say, think more about that. Consider what I'm saying here. Being nice to people doesn't have anything to do with it. As far as he's concerned, he's questioning, in a way, what the notion of nobility even is. He used the word, he tosses it around. And I think he's going to make a few declarations here and there, but I don't think he's going to go, the noble person is blah, 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 blah. He's just, this is a little hint at what he might think. Mark.
Yeah, Lindsay, earlier you asserted that that nobility, in the way that Nietzsche is using it, has nothing to do with aristocracy and wealth. I'm wondering why.
Well, because it doesn't have anything to do with aristocracy and wealth. That's not a measure of the noble human being. In some societies, like ours, we might presume that Jeff Bezos is a noble person, nobleman among our population. I think Nietzsche would just dismiss that thought in a heartbeat. There's nothing noble about Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, I understand that. You're just asserting the same opinion over again, but you're not referring to the text at all or giving any reason why he would believe that.
Well, because he doesn't believe it. He's already
just asserting this. So I don't agree with you. I've read a bunch of Nietzsche too, and I don't see it the same way. So just asserting it over and over again is not persuading me.
Well, we're here. We're not down the road wherever you are. We're in the beginning of the gay science. And so far, I haven't read anything that said the noble person is an aristocrat. I haven't seen that at all.
Well, it has to be somebody. It has to be somebody with a rank or a title, or who was born to be noble.
James, your hand wasn't up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So Mark, find me any passage in what we've just read where Nietzsche says aristocracy is nobility.
So I'm not asserting that he's using the term to be identical to a formal feudal title. That's not what I'm saying. But I am asserting that there is a relationship. It's not completely abstracted from it. He likes to glorify the elite and calls, okay, I don't have the text in front of me, so I can't do exactly what you're asking for. So I'll just assert that I think there is a relationship. I don't think it's identical. I think you're correct in that, but I don't think it's completely removed either. So I'll just say that. But fair point. I don't have the text in front of me either. I was hoping that you would provide some example of what you were talking. That's it.
Well,
Thank you.
okay, sure. Quan.
I would say that there is a complicated relationship between hereditary aristocracy and their pretension to nobility in the true sense of the word. But I want to be very specific here about Nietzsche. If you remember, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we read a paragraph about the exquisite politeness of the knights between themselves because they are people who are proud and who would seek to have a fight with unbroken people rather than with broken people, right? He did not say clearly that he favored aristocracy by birth, but I would say that in this paragraph, he showed a certain favor to military aristocracy. I stop here.
I think he showed a certain favoritism for that kind of behavior, not the class of people. Looking for the challenge and respecting people who you can be challenged by. James.
Yeah, I just wanted, I just cut me off if I'm just belaboring the point, but in number 18, he talks about the classical coloring of nobility and specifically Greeks of noble descent. And this is the definition of nobility, of noble. So noble comes from nobility, and the dictionary definition says that I already cited the dictionary definition, which is of person or people illustrious or distinguished by virtue of position, character, or exploits. Well, that's different. Yeah. So there's different, so it can be distinguished. So anyway, yeah, so that's fine. It can go either way. But in terms of like what Nietzsche says, yeah, he does say Greeks of noble descent. That means somebody that had a title. Yeah.
He does say that, but I think he's using the word in a conventional sense. I don't think that's what he's actually asserting is what nobility is. They were considered the nobles of their culture. Nicole.
I just want to say, Mark, I feel like, even you have like a aristocratic background, you're born into the, gentility, but you still can't obtain like very vulgar or distasteful aesthetical valuing things. So it doesn't mean necessarily you're going to be noble or aristocratic. I think going back to the 19th century, a lot of writers that write on the nobility. I think what's the name of that painter? Oh my God, I forgot. The dandy. Is that the Baudelaire? Baudelaire said, being noble, having an aristocratic mind, meaning you're gonna have that unshapeable determination to be unmoved. So I think nobility refers to that sense of sentiment where you have that very grounded stillness in yourself. You're not gonna actually be shaking in the face of adversity. This is just my expansion on it. But I just do believe it does not necessarily have anything to do with like your birth, that like where you come from. Yeah.
I would say, and I think that's based on some of the things that we've read earlier, especially Schopenhauer as educator, that he thought Schopenhauer was a noble human being.
I think so too.
Yeah, and he was not an aristocrat. He was not none of that stuff. And I also think that Nietzsche is thinking of himself as has a kind of nobility. I could be wrong. I can't back that up right now, but I do. Some of this autobiographical stuff suggests that to me. Mark.
Yeah, thanks. So, all right. So for some historical context, this was written like I think about 1860 something, 62. maybe, probably in Switzerland or Germany. I'm not sure exactly. Um, in 1900, I believe every country in Europe, with the exception of, I think, France, um, had a formal monarchy. The monarchy in Germany wasn't eliminated until 1919. So the idea, like so I live in the United States. I don't know about everybody else, but so the idea of aristocracy and the formal class stratification of society is very alien to a person living in 2024 in the United States. But to somebody living in 1860 in Central Europe, a German speaker, that was not like some like abstraction or like some very far off thing. So I agree that he's not using noble in the literal sense of someone who necessarily has a hereditary title. But back to, I think it was Nicole's point, in order to cultivate oneself, it requires a lot of resources and a lot of time. And that can require like a lot of privilege. You can't like study philosophy if you're like working on the farm all day long, or it's at least much more difficult. So, and I believe Nietzsche actually claimed to have Polish nobility in his ancestry. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I've read that. So I don't think that the idea of nobility and the elite, it's not identical in Nietzsche's mind. I'm certain about that, but I don't think it's completely divorced either. When he's talking about, when he's exalting the Greeks of the past, he's not talking about the vast majority of people. He's talking about the teeny elite that's living on top of the class structure, that have all the slaves that are doing all the work for them. And so, yeah, when you have all those resources underneath you, it's great. You can cultivate yourself. But when you have the aristocracy on top of you, it's difficult to cultivate yourself. So I think the relationship, it is somewhat metaphorical, but I don't think it's completely divorced from the society that he lived in, which was much more hierarchical and much more stratified than the one that I lived. That's what I want to say.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's important to realize that he's quite a critic of the German Reich, however. But I'm going to give you your point in the sense of a metaphorical reference. Okay, I'm going to go with that. Quan.
Yeah, I want to go a little bit in the direction of the last speaker, in the sense that Nietzsche was a student of Greek philosophy, and we all know that Plato was an aristocrat by birth. In his many dialogues, he would favor a kind of meritocracy, meaning that it's not enough for you to be born into the aristocracy. You have to develop your virtues, wisdom, valor, humanity, and so on. But if you read Plato's dialogue, it's full of aristocrat by birth. So I would say that there is a very fine line here, but it's debatable. I stop here.
Well, okay, it's kind of hard to. I think that Nietzsche, and this is based on some of the reading we've already done, thinks that there's more to what he thinks of as the higher type of human being, the noble human being, that doesn't depend on aristocracy. There may be some way that you can wrangle that in. I'm not going to, like an aristocracy of dignity or something. There may be some other way to use that word, but it's not an aristocracy of wealth. That does not confer nobility or a higher kind of human on that person. They just have more money than anybody else. Barbara.
Well, I think, we're talking a lot about nobility, but if we look back at 18, we see that his complaint is that there's too much slavishness in the society. And his feeling is that it's a sort of an either or. Nobility is associated with some kind of virtue that you can develop. And if you're slavish and equal, then there's no, let's say, there's no ground between you and the next guy so that you can develop ahead of him. And so in 19, I get that feeling too, that where it talks pretty much about people who are basically, I think, virtuous people. In other words, people who have nobility, sort of innate or intrinsic nobility. And they are the ones who can develop and become, through adversity, and become better people, not the mass of slaves who are just sort of all trying to be the same. So I think that his idea of nobility has to do with something to do with bringing forth virtue in your, out of yourself, right? And then developing it to become even a better person.
Yeah, I'm sort of, I would agree with you. I think the thought that I had while you were saying that was that nobility is a personal virtue. It's not a cultural virtue. It's something that Nietzsche perceives that you do yourself. I'm not sure that he thinks you become noble. I don't know if he thinks you're born noble or if we become that way. But I think that when he uses the word nobility earlier, not in the nobility of the Greek society, because that was so clearly the nobles and the slaves, and that's how the distinction was, that the person who makes something of himself for himself, there's a kind of nobility in that. James.
Yeah, I think we'd feel a lot better if you had, a quotation or something to back that up. I just wanted to point out a fact. Nietzsche published this book in 1882. Germany had a landed, what do you call it? A landed aristocracy. It had people, even in the 20th century, before, I guess in the in the 1920s, 1930s, comedians still made fun of the titled people in Europe, and that included prior to the Third Reich, there was the landed aristocracy, maybe, and I think it still existed in the Third Reich. They still retained their titles. So this idea of a landed aristocracy, nobility, call it whatever you want to call it, Nietzsche did not know any other kind of society to actually live in except from history. He actually was the person who lived in that society that was based on having titled people take care of the land. The titled people were entitled to take care of the land, and ordinary people were not. The other people weren't exactly slaves; they were freemen, but they if they worked for the titled people, they were they were semi peasants, semi serfs. So it was kind of it was that kind of a tiered society, and he didn't actually ever live in a different kind of society than that one.
So what are you saying he's saying? You disagree
I
with
don't
me.
say what he thinks. I only say what he writes. He never ever says that there's only one kind of nobility that applies to a person of high values. And if someone is a person of rank or title, or such as those Greeks that I'm discussing, then that's not what I'm talking about. I'm only talking about people who are nice or something like that, or people who are extra good or something like that. No, he doesn't say that. I'm just saying you can't make that argument if you don't even have a quotation to back it up.
No, James, we've had those quotations earlier. I'm just saying that he refers to the highest man and nobility without reference to wealth and landed wealth and cultural aristocracy. And right at the end of this, so you have he's projecting here a society ruled with prudence. Is there a noble, prudent man? He's saying to be noble might then come to mean to entertain follies. So they're not part of the group. They're outside of the group. They're outside of convention. That to me is, I don't know how further I have to get to capture what I'm trying to say he's saying.
Yeah, the
So-
implication doesn't come across to me at all. Entertaining follies is making fun of nobility. In other words, maybe this might not happen, but if people could get tired of a tyranny of truth, then they might want to honor the lie. If people were getting tired of the tyranny of prudence, they might kind of applaud when they might applaud follies. And of course, that does describe various styles of comedy. So yeah, that he's just pointing out that out of prudence, a certain kind of prudence could also emerge a certain kind of foolishness. And
No.
I don't think we need to honor it that much. I mean, it is a kind of like an interesting play on words. It's a play, there's plays on words, and there are ironies, like there's a lot of skill involved in this paragraph, but yeah, I don't think we have to turn it into this proves that there are, when Nietzsche was referring to nobility, he wasn't referring to the life that Germans were leading at that time.
Okay, I'm just going to do this one more time. The last sentence, in a society where there is a tyranny of truth and they could spur the growth of a new kind of nobility. To be noble might then come to mean to entertain follies. That would be what a noble person in that society would do, not following the rules. That's where I'm getting this notion.
Yeah, but the word might is important here because that implies that it's just a kind of a spurious suggestion, really, or an irony, not something that is to be taken completely seriously. And he's making fun. He's also making fun of the upper class. The upper class are the guys that are taking care of the land. That's why the state was so small. The state was relatively small in Germany because the nobles were actually out there working in the provinces, taking care of the land and managing the people.
It's also hunting fox.
Whoop. Mark.
Or hunting foxes? I don't know.
Mark has the floor. Mark. Hello, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Sorry, I took this. Yeah, Lindsay. So what metaphor or what aphorism are we on right now? I got the text in front of me now.
We're still on 19.
19. Okay.
20.
20. Okay. All right. Okay. Is that for consideration of twofold pain is easier far to bear than one? So now how's up?
Say that again. I couldn't quite understand.
What's the first line of the aphorism?
Oh, it's the first line. It's called the dignity of folly. A few millennia further along on the road of the last century, and everything men do will exhibit the highest prudence, but that way prudence will lose all of its dignity. By then it will be necessary to be prudent, but it will also be so common and vulgar that a disgusted taste will experience this necessity as a vulgarity. And just as a tyranny of truth and science could increase esteem for the lie, a tyranny of prudence could spur the growth of a new kind of nobility. To be noble might then come to mean to entertain follies.
Right. Okay. So I think I agree with what James is saying here. It says might then come to be, implying that is not what it is right now. So implying that there's a kind of change in the sense of what noble means. At least that's the way I read it. Thanks for that. I found the thank
Oh, good. Okay. Okay. Fred.
Yeah, I think we should perhaps just set this aside, this discussion, because I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here. And I think you're actually right, Lindsay. He does come up with an alternative of nobleness, but it's not till further. For example, in aphorism 55, he directly addresses the question, what makes a person noble? But we're not there. We're not there. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. I know. That's the point. That's the point. That's the point, Lindsay, is that you're purporting Nietzsche's notion of nobleness, which he has not yet given. In our reading up to that, I'm sorry. Can I finish, Lindsay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Jeez. Nietzsche delights in tearing down the conventions of society, and then he gradually replaces those with his own definitions of, to put it in quotes, nobility and morality and so forth, after he finishes tearing down conventional notions. So far, what we've read up to so far is largely the process of destruction of the conventional notions of nobility. And we will see that he will eventually come up with his own alternative notions of nobility, but we are not there yet. So we should probably just leave it at that and press on. In other words, I think you're kind of committing what we have taken to be the cardinal sin here of jumping ahead from where we are. Thanks.
I'm not, I have not asserted that Nietzsche defines nobility at all. I don't know why you thought I said that. I don't believe that.
Well,
We're
I
gonna-
just reference you, we'll get to it in the future. We can discuss it at that point. When we get to 55, where he directly addresses the question, what makes a person noble, in his own words.
Well, okay.
We're not
then.
there yet.
I will be delighted when we do get there because it's a mystery to me. The reason I got upset was because you said I said something that I did not say. I'm the one advocating that Nietzsche has not defined it. He's using the words and he's exploring this idea of what nobility and the highest man is, but he certainly hasn't come out with any kind of definition at all. Nicole.
Well, I must have misunderstood you, because I gathered that you were defining an alternative definition of nobility according to Nietzsche, but I must have misinterpreted that.
Well, I am in a way. I think he's got his own perception and his own notions about what nobility is.
Exactly, but we're not there yet. So
We're not.
we should move on.
Nicole.
I just think it's nice to know what nobility means to Nietzsche, but I think why we read stuff is because we wanted to get our own understanding, interpretations of things. So I think sometimes it's good to expand things upon what Nietzsche said and coming to our own conclusion. We don't even need to follow his guide. Sometimes maybe he's wrong, but yeah.
Totally. Yeah. That's one thing to really always keep in mind, I think, here is there's no need to agree.
Yeah.
Disagree with him. Just
agree on disagree.
yeah, we can do that. We
yes.
can do that. Okay. Moving on. Okay, so I think this is just an amazing aphorism, 21. The kind of thinking that goes on here, I think, was the kind of thinking that I was just awestruck by when I first ran across this. So, to the teachers of selfishness, and I think that the first sentence really spells it all out. A man's virtues are called good, depending on their probable consequences, not for him, but for us and society. The praise of virtues has always been far from selfless, far from unegoistic. So if you are praising somebody else's virtues and calling them good, you're doing it because you are a beneficiary That's what he's asserting here. That's how I read this. And that's a very selfish reason to call it good. So he's kind of challenging the word good as well. Any thoughts? No thoughts? Really? You agree with him?
This is 2021.
21, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the idea is that yeah, virtues are rewarded based on their value to others. They're called good for that purpose, and it's not selflessness. Positive virtues are generally harmful to their possessors because of the force with which they dominate the self and remain unbalanced with other personal instincts. Mastering a virtue is becoming its victim. That is why your neighbors praise you for it. So yeah, it's kind of like beware of promoting your own virtue. It can be your downfall. And I can't wait to hear Quan on this.
Yeah, okay, Quan.
I think that here, this paragraph is maybe a longer and a deeper elaboration on the fact that nobility, one possible definition of nobility would be to go against conformity. Because here, if you are taught to be selfless by others because the society needs you to behave in a certain manner, so much the better if it's your true understanding, of course. But if it's only a conditioning or you have been mesmerized or hypnotized by precisely the dominant culture, your selflessness is not really selflessness. So once again, we goes back to the nobility of the man capable to think for himself rather than going blindly to what the society dictates as conformity. I stop here.
Okay, well, I think you've read nobility in there somewhere that I'm not finding that, but that's okay. I think he's just trying to make the observation that praise of somebody else's virtues is somebody else's selfless behavior is because it benefits you. And so that person who does that is selfish and would not do it himself. Nicole.
I just found that his actual way of thinking is quite interesting because he said if you possess this virtue, which is go against your other instincts, it's gonna be harmful to you. For example, if you possess the virtue of justice, you want it to be fair, you want to be justifiable to other people, but at the same time, you want to be selfish. That's your other instinct. I don't want to do that thing. I want to be selfish and think about my own interest. So that means he implied there's a contradiction in that person. Like the two virtues are not aligned together. So that's not real virtue. That's a facade. That's like a contrived, put on sort of makeup. So I don't know. I feel like Nietzsche is quite what's the word? Morbid sometimes. His psychological makeup. I'm not saying he's a bad person. I'm just saying, there's something he has to actually go to the therapy to look for it. Yeah. I don't know if my take on this is but I do believe if there's a contradiction, then that should be virtue. Virtue should be what you say is exactly what you heart feels to do. It should be alignment.
Well, okay, I think he's really the title of this is to the teachers of selfishness. And he's having a little fun with the idea that the teachers of selfishness are the people who are saying that other people's virtues that benefit them are good. And that there's a contradiction in the person declaring the other person's virtues good because they're useful to him. They don't realize that's why they find the virtue worth praising. They don't think that themselves. They don't go, it's to my advantage, and that's why it's a good thing. They go, it's a good thing, without going into why they think it's a good thing. That's what I think
I
is
see
going.
what you mean. Yeah, I like your explanation. Yeah. Mm.
Josh.
Yeah, I agree with you, Lindsay, that it's a powerful aphorism there. And but I would raise a question. So let's going back in history to say somebody like Hobbes, at this point in the reading, do we have a way of distinguishing the implication of this of what he says here about kind of a selflessness being actually covering up for a form of selfishness? Do we have a way of distinguishing that from earlier observations, or cynical, or self-interested forms of interpretation of, say, ethics that it isn't? I don't, I'm not that familiar with Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism, but isn't that also based on a kind of a notion that we use our selfishness for the greater good, and which implies that the greater good has to include we buy into it because we get something out of it.
Yeah, there was, I think it's aphorism 2 or 3 or one of the very early aphorisms in this book, direct attack on utilitarianism. And then following that, I think it's number 4, is an attack on deontological thinking, to duty. Doing something out of your duty is not a good thing to do. So he's addressed these issues earlier, attacking both, overtly attacking them. Quan.
Yes, I would say that Nietzsche here, as in most of his aphorism, is making a very lucid analysis or description of reality, of social reality. Okay, uh, it is absolutely normal that people who would take advantage of some behavior would praise it as virtue. Maybe what is interesting here is, as you said, that he would stress the fact that those people giving the compliment to the person having that so-called virtue would not be aware of their own selfishness.
Right. Yeah.
And that is, I think, his awesome discovery of our collective unawareness.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I think. That's how I feel about this whole thing. Nietzsche has looked deeper than hardly any of us do. I shouldn't include the rest of you guys. Me. And when I read something like this, and this is just the beginning, there's so much more of this kind of really in-depth psychology, if you will. This was so striking to me that it's like, wow, there's a whole contradiction built in here that I have just never seen before. And that shatters a little bit, or shakes up a little bit, concepts of morality and ethical behavior, and the more selfish interests a lot of us might have that we just don't acknowledge, that we're really just looking out for number one when you get right down to it. That is. All right. Okay, 22. I think 22 is just playing around. The very last sentence, he has a dream about how he's a prince. Nicole, I can hear whatever it is you're doing there. Okay. You're not listening to me, is what you're doing. Okay.
Listening to you, I say it's so striking introspection. I heard that. I'm thinking.
Okay, the title is the order of the day for the king in French, no less. And so he has this dream of imagining all the things and how people are going to react to him and all that. And then he says at the end, it seems to me that on this occasion, the God of dreams was pleased to make fun of my habit of beginning the day by ordering it and making it tolerable for myself. And it is possible that I have sometimes done this too, formally, as if I were a prince. And I think there's a bit of an autobiography going on here, and I really do believe that. I think if he says, I do this, I do that, I think he's really owning the fact that he does do that. And I don't know that anything especially is revealed one way or the other here. So, anybody, any thoughts at all? No? Okay. All right, well, we're going to wrap it up. Right after we're done here, I'm going to send the email out for next week. And next week will be 1 hour, and I'm going to go from 22 to, or 23 to 30, even though we're probably not going to get anywhere near that. But read all of those up to 30, just in case we zoom through these a little faster, because I know some of them, like this one, there's not a whole lot to say about that. It's just, I think he's just having some fun here. So keep an eye out, be in the email, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Lindsay. Thank you, everyone. Night night.